kind of sneaks up on all of us because we only see it every 10 years. And so this time around, we're really working very hard to try and help the public understand the opportunities for transparency in the redistricting process and potential there, and also the potential for meaningful community engagement. And that's why we're so pleased today to have Dr. David Padgett with us. He is a professor at Tennessee State University since 1999. He's the associate professor of geography and the director of the Geographic Information Sciences Laboratory there. And he has been very engaged in doing a lot of work to use GIS to empower community-based organizations to address environmental justice issues and to really help organizations that are grassroots understand how the power of GIS can help them tell their story better. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're really excited to hear more about how we can use what's referred to as communities of interest to help organizations use redistricting as a tool to get the kind of representation that they need. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Professor Padgett. And if you have questions, please mute yourself. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. Mary Ann Reeves, our vice president for the state, who's been heading this redistricting project, will be monitoring the chat and will help handle the questions after Dr. Padgett has done his presentation. So I turn it to you now.
Good afternoon, I guess that for everybody now, perhaps. So just a little bit of background on my experience with geographic information systems. I started out with paper maps and pen and ink and light tables and just doing everything by hand. And then a little while after that, computer cartography came along, computer mapping came along. And by the time I graduated from college and was working for the federal government, we saw some of the first electronic versions of geographic information systems, which connected computer maps to databases. And then things evolved to where they are now very quickly, almost too quickly. So what I'm going to do today, and please bear with me, is not talk so much about mapping, but just showing how mapping can be used to analyze community demographics and community characteristics as we start to develop and formulate, how we approach communities of interest and so on and so forth. I got into redistricting about 10 years ago when I was recruited to be part of an effort to use geographic information systems in the redistricting process. And so back then, as far as the tools being public, that was just when they were starting to be public. And so what's happened between, say, 2010 and now has really been amazing in terms of how far the technology has advanced. A lot of the things that we had to do in terms of making sure that the districts that we formed were met legal standards in terms of population and conformity, for not being a gerrymandered district, et cetera. Now the software pretty much does that automatically. So that's both good news and not so good news. And I'll start now by sharing my screen. The good news is that, redistricting can be done by just about anybody who has any amount of computer savvy. And so I think Mary Ann sent me this, or maybe she sent it to all of us. And so I went into some of the materials that came along with this redistricting community college, which was really interesting. And so a couple of the, I would recommend to anyone that you take a look at these community mapping PowerPoints that kind of give you a little bit of a crash course into the redistricting process and some of the technology behind it. And so you kind of get an idea of how mapping works in redistricting, and they have a couple of good case studies with regard to communities of interest. And so here is Watts in 2001 and how there was an attempt to split them up. And then, of course, there was work to bring the district together. So that's really interesting there. And also the second, this Train the Trainers PowerPoint was really interesting. It goes into what a community of interest is, and people who have shared interests and so on and so forth, and how mapping can be used to bring these communities of interest together, and community-based mapping and so on and so forth. So again, I'd say maybe 15 years ago, if we were to talk about community mapping and GIS, most people's eyes would glaze over and you wouldn't know what we were talking about. But now there are these software tools that,
oh gosh, to my knowledge, it's
can be
just always
used.
been the unregistered report. I don't remember what the Argos abbreviation was. I'll have to
stop my share for just a second. So, like this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Somebody's mic is on and we can hear your conversation.
Okay.
Okay.
Still active.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, so so now there are these
Good Lord.
programs that can be used by anyone. They're free, available to the public. I mean, this is really a major shift in making this technology open to just about anybody. The problem is that, I'm not saying it's a problem, but okay, I think it's a problem because of my background as being a GIS user for 30 years. And I remember how difficult it was to take the data or population data and make it into a map. I mean, there were things that we used to do now that it's all in the cloud. All the census data, all that information that we used to have to literally hunt around for in digital format, put onto our hard drive, and then pull into a map. Nobody has to do that anymore. So a person could literally have no knowledge of what census geography is, and just open up one of these programs, and there's the layers. They're all right there. It's almost too easy. So what happens, what gets lost in that is the process. What happens with the data. How do we get the information into geographic form, and what does it really mean? And that kind of gets lost in that process. It's sort of like what happened when we used to go from doing arithmetic by hand, and then calculators came along, and so what happened, I don't know, I've forgotten how to do a square root. I can, in long division, I mean, since these calculators came along, same things happen with this mapping software. Things that we used to do by hand now are done by these programs. And just as an aside, when I was at a redistricting workshop years ago, we actually were mentored by elders who did this stuff by hand, like during the civil rights movement. I mean, I couldn't believe it when they had pictures of these huge pieces of paper all along the walls. And all those big pieces of paper now fit onto maybe a computer or phone. It's to me, it's just amazing now. So I'm going to try my best to try to walk us through some of the process. And I thought I would use a case study, a couple of case studies to do that, just to show how we actually use GIS to call population data in order to influence community decision making or what have you. And so so this is a project that I worked on for my students years ago. Unfortunately, Marion Shannon passed away just last fall. She was only 43, but anyway, so the rest of these students are still out there doing great things. And so the project we were working on was the, I don't know if any of you all remember the Maytown Center project. So the Maytown Center was this huge development that was going to go out on Bell's Bend, and Tennessee State University was involved, but the land had to be rezoned from agricultural to mixed use. And so there was this huge fight. And so we were hired, Tennessee State University essentially was hired in order to try to analyze how to best look at, the population and inform the population on exactly what was happening, because obviously Tennessee State University had a $400,000 stake in the development of the land. And so this is a little bit of the background. The property was owned by the May family, and this isn't really all that important. I just want to give you some background on exactly what was happening in the context. And so there's another map. And so then we had to engage in a spatial analysis of, the region, but this was what was most important. And so I guess in this case, the population of TSU alumni who are almost all African-American living within the specific council district where this property happens to be, they were the ones that we were going to try to assess, analyze, reach, so on and so forth. So here's the first map. So a map like this would be created using geographic information system software and census data. And so this is what we call a dot density map. So essentially what we did was we took data from the census by census tract, and then we plotted the representative number of dots. So each dot on this map equals one TSU graduate in Nashville, which we assumed was a community of interest of African Americans who had some allegiance to Tennessee State University. So in terms of defining a community of interest, those are the things that we look at, culture, well, they're Tennessee State University graduates, there might be something else, that's involved there. And so because because Nashville has this unusually large council. We've got 40 council persons in Nashville, and we all, well, there's a history behind that I don't have time to go into, but it had a lot to do when city and county merged back in 1963. People didn't want to lose representation, so they kept all the representatives and then added 5 at-large members. So we have, if you look at most cities in the United States, they have nowhere near as many council people that we do. So it makes decision-making very, very difficult in some cases because there's so many people. And in some cases, there's influence that goes beyond one's individual district. So you have all these kind of favors tossed back and forth amongst council people. So here's District 1, and there's Bell's Bend, which is very interesting because if you notice, except for this western portion of Bordeaux, not a whole lot of TSU alumni in the area, right? And so that's one thing that we saw from this. Another thing that you'll notice is we have the alumni in each council district. So because the entire council had to vote on this particular land use change, you know, we had to see if all of the community of interest that we were dealing with could leverage, you know, their influence upon their council people, even if the council person was nowhere near District 1. And so this was the first attempt at seeing, okay, where are our people? Now, here's another look at that map, and you can kind of see here. And we meaning my team, actually attained this database from this database of TSU alumni from the Tennessee State University Alumni Association. And it was a really a kind of I don't want to say it was a kind of a difficult process, because we had to anonymize the database. So we didn't want to have, you know, Jane and Joe Public's home address on a map that had to be made public. So that's why we use this dot density method, which just gives us a representative number of persons within each council district, really within each census tract that was then overlaid with these council districts. So now we got a really good idea of where our alumni were distributed. And so the next task was reaching out to the alumni, and I'll talk about that later on. So here's former Lionel Matthews was the council person over that district, and so we were just looking at, you know, where our people were who we would hope to influence Matthews. Now, Lionel Matthews is a TSU alum, you know, which but you know, he has to represent everybody in his district. So he was kind of torn. On one hand, you had TSU alumni who were just mostly in favor of the development. But then if you notice, the majority of the people in his district, one, were not affiliated with TSU and were adamantly opposed to the Bells Bend development on what is seen as this, I don't want to say pristine, but I've been out, there's a park out there. If you want to get away from civilization and still be in Nashville, go to Bells Bend. You know, so people didn't want that to be spoiled. Also, there would have been a bridge built across the river, but the people of Bordeaux saw this Maytown Center development as this potential win for African-American community development and business development. It was really an interesting time. I wound up on Channel 4 by, what's her name, Amon's investigative report. It got really crazy. So here's another dot density map just showing where people are located, in this case in 1990, I believe. And so one of the things that we want to look at also in terms of analyzing population is that this is a static map, but human populations obviously are not static. So I want to, you know, break away from here since we're getting into this portion of the presentation and get into some maps I created for the Jefferson United Jefferson Street United Merchants Partnership. And this was when I was looking at market area in terms of, you know, where African Americans were, and, you know, regionally. And so here we're looking at a map showing year 2000, where you see the Davidson County in this region in the metropolitan statistical area African Americans almost entirely concentrated in Davidson County, and make only comprising 26% of the population, approximately. Much lower percentages as you get outside of Davidson County. And then here but these numbers have changed over time, and this is when we start to look at trends. So if we look at Cheatham County, African Americans leaving Davidson County, African Americans over that 1880, 1990 to 2000 period increasing significantly. Also in Dixon County, Robertson County losing population. Look at Rutherford County. You know, that's where things are really interesting. Significant increase in Rutherford County. And then when we move forward, so here we are, 1980, African Americans. This is inside of Davidson County. Here's North Nashville. That's a 37208 zip code area. Of course, East Nashville, and of course, the area around Edge Hill and J.C. Napier's, with of course some in Bordeaux and out along the Brick Church Pike corridor in that area. That's 1980. Now, when we go to 1990, start to see this shift to the southeast out towards Antioch, and then we get the year 2000. We can see a notable shift now, and you can clearly see these population dynamics play out. And so when we start to look at the differences from one census count to the next, these are the types of things that we have to look at, because if, let's say, there was let's take this to a political representation map of sorts. Let's say we were having a discussion a couple of weeks ago about Memphis and how a representative there may be losing Black population within his or her district. This is how you can see exactly what's happening. Okay, here and then here. And so you might say, well, how can we perhaps continue to keep these African Americans or community of interest together within one district when we say clearly there's been some movement? And I'm sure that if I was to expand this out to Rutherford County, you saw that was a significant increase. So how do we do this? Now, we simply take a layer of this. These are census block groups, I believe, and then we would take again the number of African Americans or whatever community of interest group we were looking at within those block groups, and then symbolize them based upon the numbers. And so these dots, notice one dot equals 40 people. So it's a proportionate number of individuals per dot. So this isn't a one-to-one representation of people, but this just gives you an idea of how many people have moved around within this region, within our community of interest. And so if we can get ahead of these trends, when we get ahead of these trends, then we can say, okay, here are places that might lose representation, here are places that might gain representation. And so it's good to understand these patterns before we start getting into the software, because the redistricting software isn't going to get into all these nuances. You're only going to get I guess, coming up 2020 census data. You're not going to know, well, where did these people come from? Where were they in 2010? Where were they in 2000? Which is important, because in that, and if you can recognize a trend, then that means that you can forecast ahead to the next election, so that you're not caught by surprise. And it's one thing to assume that certain trends are happening. It's another thing to be able to see it on a map like this. And this is a composite map, just showing. So the red dots show, and there's one dot per 40 people, and you can just see the magnitude of the population shift that occurred over that period of time, even within Davidson County. And so that is why we really have to, get an understanding of how we can use census data to analyze these trends. So I'm going to go back to the Maytown project again. And I just wanted to go there so that, we would understand, okay, this is a static map, but, these dots do move around from one here. And so here we're looking at a map of white population versus African American population, and this gives us an idea of numbers in terms of population density. So we're looking not only at raw numbers, but at population density. And population density is a key figure when we start to look at redistricting, because each district has to have the same number of people, but of course that might come from a much larger area in terms of numbers, as opposed to areas that have much more concentrated numbers, as we see it here in downtown Nashville, North Nashville, the West End area, and so on and so forth. And so here's where we started to really zero in on our, in this case, community of interest, being Tennessee State University alumni, and where they are located now within various districts. Now this map, as opposed to the dot density map, now this map does show people exactly, this is where these people actually are. You can see them literally on streets. But we think that as long as the maps were anonymized, we don't think we'd have a problem. And we're not really showing anything. There's no names attached to this. All you know is somebody at that address graduated from TSU. I don't think hopefully that's nothing people want to hide or be embarrassed about. Hopefully they'd be proud about that. And so this is another way. So this is a map of where we've broken out each council district. And so, this used to take quite a bit of work because we literally had to create these layers ourselves from an outside party. And this wasn't that long ago. This was only in 2009. And so now all of this information that we used to have to parse out from other places is in the cloud. And so, like I said, you can get lost in, well, where did the data come from? We don't know. It was in the cloud. But now, that's where it is now. But the roots of this, of course, was getting what we used to call a shapefile layer, and then layering over a point symbol layer of where people live. And then the third layer, of course, are the streets. So this is you're looking at it like 3 different layers of data here that, we don't have to do any of this anymore, but still you get an understanding of, where these individuals come from. And so this is an example of perhaps using alternative databases outside of the census to analyze a community of interest, because in this case, we were really trying to work upon the assumption that these Tennessee State University alumni would try to influence their council person to vote in favor of the Maytown development, or at least that's what we thought might happen. So here's some more examples of the maps. And then we started to get into looking at, I guess what you call political attitudes. So we actually went in and started to look at where our alumni live, and we started to analyze, how they might have leaned one way or the other. And what we found was really interesting. If you look at this map, so here was the Planning Commission. So we got the addresses of the Planning Commission. It's public information. And if you notice, there's a almost clear pattern here. The Planning Commission members who were, and these aren't necessarily African Americans, but the ones who lived in predominantly, or areas that were predominantly Black, voted in favor of the Maytown, voted against Maytown, and those who, interestingly, were not located in African American communities voted for, with the exception of the one who was located closer to where African American populations were. So, in hindsight, we said that if we had analyzed this spatially in terms of the attitudes of the persons who were going to make this decision, that we would have, I don't want to say, made a stronger effort to influence these planning commission members who did not live in and near the Black community. So, this is another way that we can use this type of technology in order to, leverage strategies to sway decisions, political decisions, one way or the other. Of course, that did not happen. This was a map that was made during the analysis of the Maytown Center decision. And when we saw this, we said, oh, had we done this analysis ahead of time, we would have seen that perhaps these council persons that are out here on the fringe, these planning commission members that are out here on the eastern fringe of Davidson County who aren't over here, and the ones that are out here, they might have done something differently had we done something differently. And so this is another way that just shows how mapping is powerful. And that's just basically what we concluded, that in fact, location of persons geographically relative to the demographic makeup of the population definitely in this case had some influence over how these people made a decision. And I don't know whether it was out of sight, out of mind, but again, had we seen this pattern prior to this, we would have advised the Tennessee State University administration. Of course, TSU was absolutely in favor of the Maytown Center development along with the alumni, but it didn't happen. And so here's where we started to get into actually engaging with people in our community of interest, in this case, stakeholders. And so we actually, we got an idea of the demographic breakdown of the stakeholders. And so, and we tried to foster an opinion. And this is in some ways is might mirror what happens when we start to engage with the community of interest and try to, pull from them. Well, how do you want this district to look? What are your concerns? What are your concerns? Are you concerned at all? Now, we did this the old-fashioned way, and then we had to take the responses, enter the responses of each individual into a data table, and then pull that data table into a map so that we could get a geographic representation of our community of interest thoughts and what have you. So we did have to get their addresses, and we zoomed out enough, and so we could clearly see right away here. So you notice here's Bell's Bend, all these people out here, ones they're very much against out here. And then of course, when we get into North Nashville, we get more people in favor. And then of course, then there's kind of a mix. What's interesting is there are people who are out here on the fringes who are in favor of it. Of course, it's not going to affect them. But that's a way. So this is a way that we can take survey results or poll results, or when we're starting to look at our community of influence, no matter how large it is, and see, well, where are people's individual concerns about this district or what's happening in the district, and then not only can we quantify it, we can also place it on the map. Now, we did this the old-fashioned way 10 years ago. I'm going to leave this something to think about. Today, in the I guess more modern application of this technology, I'm gonna have to stop my shares. So just a minute. Okay, let me get this over here. Share screen again. Okay, so this is a an application called Survey 123. And so with Survey 123, we can actually build into a poll or a questionnaire, a survey that can get us to educe any number of points of information from a community of interest, and then put it on to a map instantly. Because with each person's information, you'd get a latitude, longitude, location. And so this is how we would do this today. Not, call people on the phone, fill out a spreadsheet, get their address, get the latitude, longitude of their address, and then represent the Likert scale answer to a question on the map. That's what we had to do. Here, you would build the questionnaire into a mobile device, perhaps, and the individual could just answer the questions on his or her phone in real time. The answer to those questions would show up on a map, and then you would determine, where people are who are okay with their representation, where people are who are not okay with their representation, where people are who don't know anything and they're clueless, need education, need more information. All of that could be done very quickly using this software. And this software it's not free, but it's not exorbitantly expensive if you happen to be a nonprofit organization or a grassroots organization. The Environmental Systems Research Institute, the company that makes this software, has kind of a sliding scale. They have one price for corporate, then there's a price for educational institutions, and there's another price perhaps for nonprofit organizations or organizations working in the public interest, and so on and so forth. And so again, that's so we again, the way that we develop these maps is, again, taking a survey. We had to go through a number of steps in order to see exactly, okay, where are, what are the opinions of our population on a variety of issues. In this case, it was whether or not they were for or against the Maytown Center development. And again, looking at the demographics of the those who responded to the survey, in general, the white respondents were mostly against it for a variety of reasons. And like I said, this was a really polarizing issue at the time, especially being in the heat of it, because like I said, Tennessee State University had a $400,000 stake in the project. The Bordeaux could see development occurring and business opportunities if that bridge was built across the Cumberland River, and so on and so forth. But then that was pitted against some of the environmentalist and conservationist and preservationist attitudes that were held by, the largely white population. But another interesting thing in the context of this had to do with the relationship between the people in Bell's Bend and the people in Bordeaux around landfills. Now, of course, we know about the Bordeaux landfill. The Bordeaux landfill, built in 1973, right next to the upper middle class community of Bordeaux. And they had this landfill. The 1968 Housing Rights Act was passed, which allowed for, African Americans in many cases to leave areas of concentrated poverty that were developed through the urban renewal program and redlining. And finally, African Americans were able to go. And at that time, Bordeaux was the suburbs, per se, of Nashville. And then 5 years later, Nashville decides to dump half its garbage right next to that community. So Bordeaux, and to some degree, the late Thelma Harper was very much involved in that fight against the Bordeaux landfill. And so, but then the next place that Nashville targeted was Bell's Bend for the landfill. And so because the largely African-American contingent who were fighting against the Bordeaux landfill, they formed in solidarity with the mostly white environmentalists at Bell's Bend. And so there was this coalition that held in place until this happened. And so that relationship of these two grassroots fights against landfills, brought a whole other layer of unity that you would, if you didn't know the history, you wouldn't understand what was going on. Like you might like, well, why are some of these African Americans fighting with these white environmentalists at Bell's Bend, knowing how good this could be to the Black community of Bordeaux and the historically Black college university? But there was a certain contingent in Bordeaux that remembered that those white environmentalists were with them fighting against the Bordeaux landfill. So there's just all that underlying context here that we looked at. This is just more of the survey results, just looking at our community of interest in terms of their attitudes, and then again placing them on a map so that we can make some more informed and strategic decisions about how to approach these individuals. And then, like I said, this could be, in this case, this was for the development of a multi use property on Bell's Bend, or it could be for whether or not people are satisfied with their representation or would like to change, or so on and so forth. Try to keep their district together, and then you can see exactly where people have certain attitudes by using the software. So there's just more maps and more analysis of where people were located versus what they thought about the project. And again, I think we concluded back then that, in this case, that our original assumption was that the closer people were to Bell's Bend, that would have a greater influence upon their opinions. Clearly, as you can see on this map, that was not the case. So we eliminated the geographic relationship between people's attitudes and what they thought. Again, a lot of the opinion was driven by whether or not people were environmentalists or had some kind of history with the Bordeaux landfill or not, or what have you. So, see, I think that is I know there was one more thing that I wanted to share. I think that's it. So, like I said, that was a bit of a crash course in the science of mapping and connecting maps to people. And so I wanted us to, just kind of get a better understanding of how this redistricting software works, kind of getting into the guts of it and seeing how it works and how we can connect the software to human attitudes and opinions as we identify and try to understand the attitudes and perspectives of our communities of interest, using geographic information system software, perhaps even outside of the redistricting software, but they too can be used in unison with one another. I think, it's 12:48, so I think I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, David. We really appreciate that. One of the first questions we had was for somebody to put the link up for the charge redistricting training that you mentioned at the very beginning of your program. And that is in the Zoom link. It's free. The next one is on Saturday, May 22nd. I urge everybody to sign up for that. There's also another training that Mattia Powell is in charge of, and that is with the crowd training, and that will also go over some softwares. So Mattia, if you wouldn't mind putting the link there for people if they want to sign up for that training. These are all free and they're on Zoom. Okay, so we'll start with our questions. Okay, this is from one of our league members. So do political parties in Tennessee use dot density mapping for redistricting efforts? For instance, register Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, etc.
I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that dot density mapping probably, I guess it would depend. If you're looking for just a general distribution of population, and while anonymizing or keeping anonymous, or keeping or avoiding putting people's homes on maps, then I'm sure that they might use any means. But do I have personal knowledge of what's going on? No. But like I said, one of the issues in terms of this technology now is that all of the parameters that make a district legal are already built into the software now. When I did this just 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. We had to manipulate the software, and you're moving around and zooming in, zooming out, adding data, moving people, and still, even then, you weren't really sure if what you had drawn as a district was legal. Now that still had to be determined by some other person, individual outside. But now the technology says this district is fine. So it's not even an argument. So if you get into an argument as to whether one district is better than the other district, it's not even about legality anymore. When I did this 10 years ago, it was whether or not is this a gerrymandered district? Wait a minute, this is outside the numbers of people that are supposed to be in this district. Does this representative even live in this district? I mean, those are the types of things that would disqualify a district. But now the software does that automatically. So it's just a matter of, it makes things more difficult, really, I think, because if the Republicans or whatever party draws a district and the other party says, well, that district, we don't like that district. Well, they're both legal. So guess what happens? So it really means that a really strong argument has to be made now because you're not arguing over whether one is illegal or wrong or not. It's which one do we think is okay, you know? And that, like I said, that's technology is what it is. I mean, it's almost as if the redistricting software is smarter than we are. Unfortunately, we can't think on that scale. Most people can only interpret maybe up to 3 variables on a map. So the map I just showed you had where people live, their attitudes towards the Maytown Center, and maybe whether or not they were a TSU alumni. Most people can interpret that map. You start adding age, race, something else, 6, 7 variables. Most people can't process that. This software can process all of that just in an instant. So, so what used to take a lot of time and trying to figure out, now the software does it very quickly, which is why the you know, why the acceptance of these districts by a party happens so fast. There's not anybody drawing a map, trying to figure out. It's just like boom, 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 boom. This good? Yeah, okay.
So
Yeah.
go ahead. I'm sorry, David, I interrupted you.
Oh, I'm done.
Oh, you finished? Okay. What is the process of predicting population by area based on historical information?
Yep. Well, there's a lot of math involved, but yeah, that's what's happening now, because it used to be that we just got this, not you know, the census would come every 10 years. But now we have the American Community Survey and all these other models that use trends to project forward. So, which, you know, so we're saying if this population is going in this direction, then we will project forward 10 years, and this is how it might look 10 years from now. So now, so essentially, not only are we modeling based upon the present, people who are in retail, especially people who are in retail. Let's say if, I don't know, if Publix is trying to decide where they're going to put their next store, you know, they're going to look 30 years in the future in terms of population trends to determine if that store is going to survive. You know, it's not some willy-nilly, oh, this is a nice neighborhood, let's put a Publix here. Oh, no. So there's a lot of math involved, and even a lot of social sciences involved, because you have to also look at, you know, certain attitudes and how things are trending. And sometimes it's surprising what happens. I mean, I was in Atlanta recently, and I was in Stone Mountain, and it was okay. Now, it wasn't too long ago, a person who looked like me wouldn't be caught after dark in Stone Mountain, Georgia. But that's changed. Who predicted that? I don't know. Somebody did. And sometimes you'll see, I don't know, especially one of the most prolific users of this software is McDonald's Corporation. McDonald's is a real estate corporation that just happens to sell a couple of hamburgers, right? So sometimes you'll see a highway interchange. There's nothing out there except the McDonald's and nothing else. That's because that McDonald's owns all of that property. I mean, they've been doing that forever. And then Wendy's follows behind them, you know? So, yeah, so yes, the answer is yes. This software can be used to make population projections forward.
Great. The next one is a comment, not a question. It says, we need a bipartisan/nonpartisan commission to draw the lines to avoid gerrymandering. Amen. This one is also a comment. I don't know if you want to comment on it or not, David. It says the House has passed a bill. This is a U.S. House, has passed a bill to require that in every state, but the Senate is adamantly opposed. It could, if we could get that piece pulled out of the Voting Rights Act and passed in the next month or two, that could make a big difference in how our state is redistricted. I believe they're referring to HR1 and S1.
Okay, I can't say that I'm entirely familiar with that, but what I can say is it's not. Yeah, I guess there's a battle going on in terms of voter suppression or not. One of the most interesting films that I've seen with regard to that is a film called After Selma. It's a documentary. Some of y'all have probably seen it, but it's called After Selma. It's after, it's named after the Selma to Montgomery March that led up to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Fascinating film. Fascinating film. It's I won't do a spoiler alert, but it really, really brings to light how aggressive certain political attitudes are at voter suppression. And a lot of it, I mean, even before President Obama got elected, after President Obama got elected, they got really serious. They said, oh, we can't let this happen again. But I mean, even before that, I mean, it's really as soon as the Voters' Rights Act was passed, more finessed ways of voter suppression came that are just unbelievable. Really good. It's called After Selma. I think it was only maybe it's 2019. It's a very new, recent documentary. It's one of the good things about being I was gonna say incarcerated. I mean, in what is it? Quarantine is that I watched a lot of movies, and that was one of them. It was really, really good. If you have any interest in voting and voting suppression or anti-voting suppression, yeah.
Okay, here's the next one. What should people be doing locally who do not have access to GSI? In other words, what do you advise as the best way to conduct community of interest workshops and programs?
Wow. That's a whole other. I mean, I would just take a look at that charge redistricting training. I mean that. I mean, not that that's going to immediately teach a person on GIS. That's a good question. I am currently an ethical geo fellow, and the title of my project is Democratizing Geospatial Technology. And so a lot of geospatial tools are out there. These redistricting or district mapping tools are just out there for the public to use. The question is, can people use them? And so I've developed a methodology or a structure for getting people who aren't computer savvy to become computer savvy. And just in a nutshell, it really involves connecting the generations together. So a lot of the people who, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of the these meetings or workshops on redistricting are heavily weighted towards people who are baby boomers, 55 years of age and older, people like me who grew up with 3 channels on the TV set, no remote control. I was the remote control. David, turn that channel. David, get up and turn the channel on the TV. I was the remote control. And no internet. And so our generation, when we get around technology, it's kind of spooky. But these young people have no fear. They don't even know a time when there were no cell phones, right? And so so what we do is I get a connection and say, look, find some young people to be your technical people. And in turn, these younger people are then educated on the why. Okay, you want me to do this GIS for you with this, why? Well, let's talk. Not all young people, but a lot of them, they don't know anything about, Selma, Alabama, and marching, and any of that. They just know, yeah, there was this bridge in Alabama and people got, and the guy got beat up, but that's all they know. They really don't trust me. I'm around these people every day. They don't know. No disrespect to history teachers in the schools, but so it's great for these young people to get first person accounts of of people who are still alive who couldn't vote in Alabama and Georgia, Mississippi, maybe even Tennessee. And so, but that's one strategy, connect the generations, get somebody. I can tell you as fast as I can. I was working with the community in New Orleans, and I was trying to get them to do some maps for flood mitigation and flood prevention, really. Most of the people in the organization were my age and older. We were working remotely. I could not get these people to do the maps. I couldn't get it done. I said, look, one of you all has to have a nephew at Dillard or Xavier University, somebody 20. Just give me somebody 20 years old, get them on the phone. One of them really did have a nephew who was a junior at Xavier. We got the maps done in 2 hours. This young man had never used GIS in his life. 2 hours, no problem. People my age, it was, so, but that young man really learned a lot about his community in working with and for his uncle, his elder uncle. He said, wow, I never knew it. I thought flooding only happened at the Katrina. I thought we were okay. No. So it works. So yeah, democratizing the technology is going to take an intergenerational effort, because those of us who are more politically active and astute are retired or in second careers, but not tech savvy. I admit, I still got this flip phone. This is a TSU phone. This is my phone. So that's where we are. Get some young people involved.
Okay, I agree with that. What communities of interest are most frequently used?
What communities of interest? I guess there's all kinds of communities of interest. I guess it depends upon where we are. The examples that I've seen most obviously are along racial and ethnic lines, but then, but what's interesting, just speaking of communities of interest and gerrymandering and some of my experience in working with district line mapping in Tennessee, is sometimes there's collusion between the parties. And I wish I could find it, but there's research that shows that, okay, let's say you have two adjacent voting districts. Here's one party A, party B. And let's say over a 20-year period, a lot of people who have more in line with the representative party A start to move over here, right? So what they'll do is these two will talk. Even though they're in different parties, they'll talk and they'll say, well, why don't I just draw my district into yours, so I'll still have some of my people, and so where my district is changing, so people that look like you, I'll let you draw yours into mine. And that happens. And so that usually happens in places that are gentrifying. And I wish I had more time. I have there's a really fascinating study, a lot of studies, I think it was done by the Brookings Institute, that showed how much gentrification has changed the demographics and income of especially regions around urban areas. And so when that's happened, these opposing politicians will say, well, you give me your gentrifying neighborhood and I'll give you the ones in the inner ring suburbs that's become more ethnically diverse. And so as a result, what happens is, that's why it's so difficult to vote out an incumbent, because they constantly manipulate the district lines so that they always have their community of interest in their district. And so that's why you might wonder, like, how in the world is this joker still in office? That's they keep their people in their back pocket by drawing those district lines the way they want it. And even if they have to, and that's what they do, they look at those demographic trends and they'll trade. you know, give me your gentrifiers. I'll give me your hipsters. I'll give you my upwardly mobile people moving to the suburbs, and we'll both get reelected. And they can use this software to do it very easily, to set those trends, and they'll see, oh, wait a minute, I'm losing a lot of my Latinx constituents over here. Well, let me talk to this council person over here, or this representative, and let me see if I can draw them back into my district. You know, whereas if left alone, maybe this district adjacent would perhaps have some Latinx representation. You might have 2 Latinx representatives, but no, I'm gonna keep y'all in my district, and it stays the same. It's really fascinating. At least I think it is, how the geography is used politically.
Right. Do you know of anyone using other Census Bureau data, such as the American Community Survey, for studies like this?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, like I said, the ACS, American Community Survey, it's sample data. It's not 100% data like at the block level, but it tells us, well, the difference between the block level and say the census block group level is that the block level has very basic information. It's race, age, but it's not till you get to the sample data that you get income, and how many people are there per household, and is English spoken, those types. All that richer data is when you get to the sample data in the ACS. So yeah, absolutely, if you want to understand trends beyond race and age, yeah, I'm quite sure everybody uses the ACS data.
So I hate to interrupt, but we're really running out of time, and this has just been fascinating. And I bet Marianne still has extra questions, right?
About 14 of them.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think what this means is that we may be calling on you again, Dr. Padgett, because we're going to have extra questions as we learn more and more about this whole process. But I think you can see there's a lot of interest out there, and you've really given us a lot of room to reflect on how complex and intriguing this whole communities of interest question can be, and how hard it is to define in many ways.
Yeah.
Debbie, I'd like to make a comment if I could. TSU and David Padgett is going to be the faculty advisor. The League of Women Voters of Tennessee is going to be engaging, and actually has started engaging, some of their students to do our own independent maps. And so we feel that this is going to be a great opportunity for the students, and certainly for us. It's going to be sort of a marriage of, as David was talking about, between us old people and the new technology people. So we do have that. I also noticed that Mattia did put into the chat the link for the crowd training, and that is excellent training. It will have a lot of information about a software that's very free, very intuitive, and it's called Representable. You can use that to do your own communities of interest. Mapping is really, it's got its flaws, of course, but it's very user-friendly. So I guess with that, I don't have anything else.
And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, which is that this session today will be recorded and will be available on the League of Women Voters of Tennessee website, along with the other information we have, both other webinars and print material about redistricting. And we will keep filling in with additional information as we get closer and closer to the process. So I want to thank you again, Dr. Padgett, for being with us today. This has been great, and we will have many more questions for you in the future. And thank you to everybody for tuning in today.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks you. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.